Well, we're continuing on in our third unit, talking about social and political theory. The first few lectures that we looked at has to do with politics proper. How does politics work? What kind of ideas underlie it? Is government necessary? And is it good for us? These are some of the questions that have been central to political theory since philosophers began thinking about it thousands of years ago. But there are a bunch of other ideas that pop up in this field of study too. Things like gender and relationships, sexuality, expectations, gendered expectations and norms. That's what we're going to be looking at today. In the past, I have given students the option to either look at feminism or men's issues. But I found that, well, insofar as I'm trying to give you all a bunch of different perspectives and frameworks, it would just be better if moving forward I started presenting on both of these things in the same day, so that we have some sort of arena and tools with which to compare and contrast these differing perspectives. So that's basically what we're going to do today. We're going to look at Simone de Beauvoir and Beauvoir and Farrell, who you might see as being on two different sides of the sex and gender discussion that people have nowadays about feminism, oppression, relationships, men's issues, etc. So first, I'm going to present to you some of the fundamental ideas from Simone de Beauvoir's book, The Second Sex, which has been an incredibly important piece of literature for the feminist movement. And then we're going to compare and contrast what she has to say with some of the ideas that Beauvoir and Farrell brings up in his book, The Myth of Male Power. And then I hope to have a discussion about all this stuff and see what you all think. Where these thinkers might be wrong, might be right, which view you like better, so on and so forth. So let's start. One of the pieces that I asked you all to read for today was The Second Sex. It was just a small part of this book, The Second Sex, which Simone de Beauvoir wrote in the 20th century. Simone de Beauvoir has been an important figure in the different waves of feminism and the feminist movement generally. She was the longtime partner of Jean-Paul Sartre, who was an incredibly important philosopher in his own right. So she's coming at the issue of feminism, of women's oppression, from the perspective of existentialism. Existentialism is a philosophical field of study that has to do with the big questions. Why are we here? Do human beings have a purpose? Do we have free will? How should we live our lives? These are some of the central questions that de Beauvoir, Sartre, Camus, Nietzsche, and the other existentialists were trying to wrestle with in their writings. But in this book specifically, de Beauvoir looks at the problem of gender and women's oppression. And she links existentialism up to this movement. So in this book, her goal is to explore the nature of womanhood, what it means to be a woman, and its relationship to manhood in society. She's going to provide a historical analysis for us of how women have been treated throughout history. The freedoms, for example, that women have not been granted. Why that's a problem. What the womanly experience is like living in a society that she would call patriarchal. And what she would like to see change in society regarding the genders, the rights, the privileges of men and women. She is an incredibly important thinker because her thought has contributed to the flowering of this idea that has become especially popular nowadays, in which social identity is constructed. There's this idea floating around that has become more popular that what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man, consequently, doesn't have to do with your biology so much or having a particular female or male essence inside of you, but your identity is something that is like a negotiation of social forces and pressures and expectations that are imposed on you. And that's kind of how your identity is constructed and what your identity means to you and how you act it out in the world. So she's going to say that womanhood doesn't consist in having a particular biology or femaleness. It's not completely captured either by the word woman. Rather, womanhood is defined relationally and socially. And she's going to argue that it's actually defined in contrast to what it means to be a man. So one of the big arguments she's going to make in this book is historically men have had the power. Historically men have set up the society in which we live. Men have taken themselves to be the archetypal human in some sense and defined and shaped the world in relation to how they conceive of themselves. That's basically one of the ideas that she's going to be bringing out here. So, what this has resulted in is a situation in which women are molded and conditioned to live and think in a certain way that is basically good and useful for men and how men want society to be run. In this book, she talks about how language, norms, values all inform what we think gender is, what makes somebody a man or a woman, how men and women ought to behave in society. She thinks that womanhood is defined in relation is defined first and foremost to maleness. Think about the language that we use when we talk about human beings. We say things like mankind, or sometimes man is used as a short term to represent all of humanity, right? De Beauvoir doesn't think that this is an accident. It may have been done unconsciously, but the idea is that men, traditionally having the power and privilege in society, have shaped it such that what it means to be a man or male is seen as essential, the standard, and women are seen as incidental or other in her language, and defective and irrational sometimes compared to men, right? She says that in our society, well, when she was writing this at least, and you might say again today, women are seen to be dominated by their feelings, by their biology, by their hormones. They're necessarily portrayed as sexual beings. And these are all ways that people perceive and conceive of women that they don't do for men. Right? We don't say of men, oh, it's that time of the month. Right? We don't say that men are acting irrationally or they're letting their feelings take control of them. We don't see men as necessarily sexual beings like we do for women. She says this is how what it means to be a woman is understood in our society. She's not praising this. Okay, she doesn't think it's good. She's just describing the lay of the land as she sees it. This has come about because, historically, as I've mentioned, men have held the positions of power in society. She's going to say historically, men have basically played a more formative role in constructing all the stuff that you see around us, in holding these positions of formal power. And on account of all of this, men have subordinated women to them. And this is only something that we've been coming to reckon with in the last few decades. She says that women throughout history have always been dominated and oppressed. It's not the case that a particular historical event caused this. This is just how it's always been. Can you all read that? That line? Okay, I want to make sure I'm not writing it too low. She says that today, women are still being dominated and oppressed in certain ways. They are subordinate to men according to various social standards and economic conditions. She says that they've lacked the concrete means for organization to throw off their oppressors, although things have been changing in the last few decades, I think she would say, if she was still around. What makes it difficult for women to change the situation, to throw off the oppression that they face, is that she says, in a way that isn't true for other oppressor-oppressee groups, a durable bond unites women to their oppressors, unlike other oppressed groups. What is that bond? Well, in order to keep the human race going, males and females need to have sex and have children. Right? So, in some fundamental way, women are united to their oppressors and can't shake them off completely, like other oppressed groups have been trying to do throughout history and have succeeded in doing. How she links this to existentialism is she basically says that what it means to be a woman is something that is imposed on people, that they're conditioned into, constructed into, but that this limits their freedom. This limits how they conceive of themselves, how they act in the world. For her, it has everything to do with freedom, this connection to existentialism. Women are basically conditioned into believing a particular worldview, seeing themselves in a particular way. They're confined to certain norms that men are not confined to. And what all of this does is it constrains you. It constrains women, and that this is not good. In existentialism, there is a distinction made between what we might call facticity and transcendence. What it means to be a free subject in existentialism, somebody who acts freely, has autonomy, is somebody who recognizes that what society tells them, these different terms and categories, they don't actually define who you are. It involves some sort of recognition that the person has the ability to kind of do whatever they want when they want. Sure, there are pressures that are impacting us and influencing us. But what de Beauvoir wants people to realize is, women, you don't have to stay oppressed. You don't have to live the way society wants you to live. You don't have to do what men tell you to do. You can live your own life, and you can be your own person. And if you're actually trying to be free, if you're trying to achieve fulfillment and happiness, this is something that you need to do. Insofar as women have been defined by dependent on, and what she calls rendered other by men, their possibility for this transcendence has been squashed. She says that womanhood is a product of civilization and social practices. Here's a quote that sums up her view nicely. Women cannot be other than what she was made to be. And so, what she's writing about in this book is the fact that women are oppressed in society, that they are constrained, that there are all these pressures and influences molding them to be these things that are constraining and ultimately not good for them. The sexes project different expectations on one another, and this constrains us. If women have any freedom, she says it's because men have granted to them, because it's been good for men to do so. And so what she's trying to effect is social change. She's trying to get people to recognize that what it means to be woman is something that is socialized and conditioned. It doesn't have to do with having a uterus or a vagina or anything like that. It's something that you are socialized and conditioned into. That men, by and large, have done this, have participated in this, and that this isn't good. She would like to see equality of the sexes established. Not super controversial, right? She thinks that this would actually be a good thing for both men and women. She said there will always be differences between men and women. We shouldn't try to get rid of them all. But we should try to construct society so that both men and women are on an equal playing field. So that they are given the same opportunities. They're given the same possibility to find themselves and individuate and grow and learn. Because for too long, women have been under men's thumbs. And this has been bad for women, but just bad for society in general. Thus, she argues for equality. But she thinks that it's going to require a moral, social, and cultural revolution in order for us to be able to do this. But what it's going to involve is facing up to the historical facts of how women have been treated, why, and the different forces that influence, well, what a woman is allowed to do during her life, and how her life is molded by all of these social expectations and norms and values that are imposed on them. That's basically the long short of it. That's a summary of her view. Now, if we're going to contrast this with other perspectives, I'd like us to be a little bit more concrete about what challenges and oppressions women face, historically and or today. So I'd like to ask you, and this is fitting because there aren't any other men in the room actually, I'd like to ask you students, what challenges do you face that you think men or your male peers don't face? What are some challenges unique to you that are constraining you, that make your life more difficult, that put pressure on you?
Like unwanted harassment when you go outside, when you go to the bar, like literally waiting outside.
Unwanted attention and harassment. Like catcalling and stuff and...
Yeah, or they touch you, or they keep asking for your number.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of guys face this, right? If I walk down the street, I'm not going to get catcalled, right? Okay, good. What else? Think social, think sexual, think economic.
Just like the pay gap.
The gender pay gap. And what often goes along with that, or what do people talk about in association with that? The idea that a lot of women can't get past a certain, what would you call it, seniority in their organization. Their career advancement is like constrained. What is that called?
Is that the glass ceiling?
Yes. Yeah, the glass ceiling. Okay, what else?
It's kind of like our day is cut in half, where it's like when it starts to get dark, you like I don't take night classes because I have to take the bus, so it's like I can't take certain classes now because I can't take them at night.
Okay. Yeah, I would.
Just general safety.
What could we? Yeah, what could? Okay.
Like missed opportunities because of certain men, I guess.
Yeah. How can we summarize that? I see what you're saying. Maybe a better summary will come out as we keep bringing up more stuff. But we'll remember that. What else? What other challenges do you face?
I think in general, at least some of the media, women for years have been sexualized for no reason, always for men's pleasure.
Maybe we'll put that here. Sexualization. Like, you're kind of latching onto the idea that she brought up, that women are seen as necessarily sexual beings. They're sexualized in media and how other people think of them and how they're treated, right? How often do you have a guy texting you who just wants to be friends? Right? Maybe?
More importance is placed on women's looks compared to men.
Okay. Maybe we could say unrealistic beauty standards and norms. Yeah, like you're expected to be pretty and beautiful.
It like defines your worth.
And if you're not, it's like, fuck you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Expectation. You're expected to be beautiful. You're expected to be pretty. Yeah, self-worth, I guess, right, is connected to that. Yes?
Women are expected to like stay home with kids, and then if you have kids, people don't hire you because they think you're gonna take off, or if you're pregnant, like you're gonna need extra days for like appointments.
Yeah. Workplace discrimination?
Yeah.
Maybe we could say that. I'm kind of trying to keep the similar stuff in the same line, but this is going to be kind of hard because... Right, yeah. It's argued women don't get paid as much for the same job as men, that their advancement is constrained, that maybe you get passed over for a job because the employer is worried you're going to get pregnant or something, right? And he doesn't want to have to deal with that.
Wasn't there like a
right?
thing called the pink tax where like female products because they were like in pink and like displayed as this one thing were like more expensive than like the counter like of men's products? Like they were like razors and like shaving cream and what else? Even just like girls' toys as like children. Shampoo, deodorant, like all that is just like more expensive.
So maybe instead of female, we'll write feminine.
Yeah.
What's seen as feminine. Because it doesn't just have to do with biology, right? It's like toys and other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
I think more responsibility is placed on women to either get pregnant or not get pregnant, whereas like men aren't pressured as much in that aspect.
Familial expectation. How else could we summarize that whole thing? There's like an expectation that you're going to have a kid, that you're going to start a family. Maybe that you'll be a stay-at-home mom, right? We'll say family and care norms, expectations. Because let's just say generally, right, that women are expected in our society to take up the care roles, right? Not just in relationships, but also in wider society, right? Women are expected to be the teachers, the nurses, right? Those who take care of the elderly or hospice patients, right? And we do see women occupying these roles much more than men, right? And they're expected to do that. And then there's also the family thing, right? Oh, when are you guys going to have kids, right? When are you going to get pregnant? Maybe you've heard some of this already. I don't know. Y'all are pretty young, but maybe. What else?
Like, little girls are expected to be mature or, like, sit next to the problematic boy so they don't stop talking and it just ruins your experience.
Yeah, so what, how could we summarize that? Differing,
Responsibilities.
yeah,
Unwanted, because it's not like we were like, you know what, let me help this person. No, they were like, no, you have to do this. It's like,
Forced maturity.
yeah.
yeah, maybe we'll put that here, right? Forced maturity. Okay, what else? Yeah.
We're not really taken seriously very often. In a
Ah,
lot of spheres.
not taken seriously. There is, this idea goes along with actually a philosophical concept that has been pioneered within the last few decades. It's known as epistemic injustice. Have any of you heard of this? Miranda Fricker talks about it normally in association with whether or not women are listened to or taken seriously. And she says, women experience epistemic injustice when they are not allowed to speak or their voice is not heard in virtue of being a woman. So, for example, hush, sweetie, the men are talking, right? She would say that's an example of epistemic injustice. If you have something, to give, something to say that would help and be knowledgeable, but you get shut down because you're a woman. So that kind of has to do with that, right? Not taken seriously. Men generally don't get their voices quashed because they're men, right? Or people don't tend to say, oh, don't listen to him because he's a man, right? Whereas this happens to women a lot. So we'll say epistemic injustice. Okay, any other big ones? Yes.
Women are kind of expected to be the ones who are like in charge of like chores and household work, even when they're the ones working.
Right. Right.
Expected to manage and assign like who does what.
Yes. I'm just going to write down home household stuff. Right. Because I think it kind of is associated with this care thing, right? It's women's jobs to keep it all nice and tidy and clean and everything, right? That's how society, that's what it says, or the expectations that it imposes.
Like, if we don't respond how someone wants to, we're cold, but if we show any emotion, we're crazy and psychotic and, like, need to chill.
Yeah. Emotional, crazy, seen as irrational, right? Simone de Beauvoir would say, women in society are seen as irrational. They're seen as ruled by their emotions. They're perceived as being run by what's going on in them, their biology, right? Whereas men are not seen that way, right?
I really enjoy when people are asked about like presidential and like specifically when like Hillary was in the running for president and people are like, why aren't you running for Hillary? And she's like, oh, she's a woman, like blah blah blah. She's gonna easily start wars because of her emotions. I'm like, hasn't every war prior been started by a man?
Right, yeah, exactly. Women are seen as not being in control of their emotions, right? And consequently, like what they say and what they do or something, right? Yeah, which is kind of infantilizing. How about some big ones? Like, have women always been able to own property in the Western world? Or vote?
Voting.
Or, okay, so how about we say, like, historically, lack of rights and opportunity, right?
Literally to this day, with like everything getting voted against, like with reproductive rights and like Roe v. Wade and like all that stuff, like just being stripped of like human rights and just having that choice taken.
Yeah. I'll just underline that again. Anything else that you can think of? I mean, obviously, we're not going to be able to list them all, right? The general idea is this. For many years, and still recently, it is argued that women are oppressed, they're constrained by society. That we live in a patriarchy, right, in which men have always held positions of formal power and authority. They still do so. So it's men constructing the society in which we live, and that's not fair, that's not cool, that's not right. Right? Okay. Would you say that is a good encapsulation of like the feminist view? Okay. I'd like to contrast this view with one that has become a little bit more popular in recent decades. It's hard to talk about this view because it often gets, mistaken for a lot of other toxic views that are out there around the struggles that men face and the quote-unquote privileges that women have in society. If you've ever heard of MGTOW or Red Pill philosophy or the manosphere, you will have come across a lot of views that don't really have nice things to say about women and have like an opposite view of who has the power in society. I'm not going to be talking about that exactly, okay? The view that I'm going to present next is one that was developed, popularized by a self-claimed feminist, Beauvoir and Farrell. This is somebody who used to be a card-carrying member of various women's organizations. He used to give lectures and write articles on why equality of the sexes needs to be established, how women have been oppressed throughout history, how women should be liberated from the gendered expectations and norms that have been placed on them. So this is a guy who calls himself a feminist, who still calls himself a feminist today. But what he presents in his book, The Myth of Male Power, is the other side of this debate, if we can call it that. He says that equality of the sexes needs to be established, but there are a bunch of ways that men are also constrained and face certain pressures and expectations that are not being talked about. So that's what he talks about in this book. He disagrees with the view that society is just a patriarchy. He says that that view is overly simplistic. He thinks that society is a patriarchy and a matriarchy in different respects. It depends on the domain that you're looking in. Hopefully you can read that. He's going to put forth the view that, yes, while it's true men have traditionally held formal positions of power and authority, what that misses is that women also have what's called a lot of soft power in society, a lot of shadowy influence in how things are done, in how things are run, in how people act. So he would say that society's organization, all of this stuff is the result of both men and women's decisions. One gender is not solely to blame here. So what he tries to do in this book, The Myth of Male Power, is re-examine social practices and norms and gendered expectations from the male perspective. He thinks that portraying both sides has been missing from the feminist literature. And he thinks that feminism has misled many people to think that men are the reason why everything is bad. But it's also men's fault that this has been the case because they have not spoken up as to the particular issues and pressures that they face. Formerly a writer and lecturer on women's issues, he's come to believe that society is sexist to both men and women in different ways. And that men and women have varying levels of power and privilege and disadvantages depending on the domain in question. So just as we can talk about women being socialized or conditioned into having certain views of themselves, how they ought to act, how their lives are supposed to go, Farrell says there's a similar thing going on with men. Ever since boys are very little, they are conditioned and educated into having these certain views about themselves, how they should act, what they should do later in their life. Thus, men have become conditioned to view following masculine roles as giving them power when it actually doesn't. Farrell is going to define power as control over one's life, and he's going to say if you look at the gendered norms, expectations that are in society, both men and women, and the average man and woman, lack power over their lives. He says that men are disadvantaged because society has always and still continues to treat them as disposable. When a ship is going down, who gets access to the lifeboats first?
Women and children.
Women and children, right. He says that every successful society has been built on the backs of this idea that men are disposable in combat, in war, in dangerous jobs. And he provides a whole bunch of statistics to support this idea. He says in the U.S., only men are required to be drafted and fight in war, And men are generally 2 to 3 times more likely to be victims of war, including civilian casualties. Men and boys are 2 to 6 times more likely to commit suicide, and 2 to 3 times more likely to be homeless, depending on age range. He also says men and boys are 2 times more likely to be the victim of violent crimes, 3 times more likely to be the victim of murder, and more likely to be victims of sexual assault when the prison population is included. So, one of the problems with society today is that the way that we condition and socialize men is that we do so into making them accept these roles that treat them as disposable. They're expected to lay down their lives for people. That is par for the course. And men are required to take up the dirty and dangerous jobs. This is something that we don't expect women to do. He also says that in some ways, men are economically disadvantaged. In different ways compared to women, though. He provides some statistics to show that female heads of households have more net worth than male heads of households. That women in general possess much more control over consumer spending than men across almost every category. If you'll look into this, you'll see statistics that show that 85% of consumer decisions that are made by women as opposed to men. He says that if we define power in this way, stay-at-home mothers, women, possess more control over their work life and have more job security than men. Men have to deal with bosses that they hate. They're not allowed to speak back against their boss. They're not allowed to complain about their work. Whereas stay-at-home mothers, you would say, generally have more freedom in their job, and they can bring up complaints to their men heads of households. And finally, he also says that women have more financial security in divorces than men. So there are certain ways in which men are more economically disadvantaged. There is still this expectation that men need to have a career because they need to provide. That is their responsibility. That is their priority. They are taught, they're conditioned to believe this. They're expected to do this. They're expected to pay for dates. They're expected to basically be the breadwinner. And he thinks that this is unfair. We shouldn't expect men to do this, just as we shouldn't expect women to be stay-at-home mothers. He thinks that we need to liberate both of the sexes from these expectations and norms. He also argues that if you just look at the health statistics and family statistics, men are also disadvantaged in some ways. In developed countries, men on average die 7 years before women do. They have a lower life expectancy. Men are more likely to be burdened by illness, suffer chronic illnesses, and require emergency services than women. Men also have a roughly 2 times higher rate of addiction. One point that he brings up has to do with medical research. He says, while breast cancer and prostate cancers affect men and women almost equally, breast cancer research receives more often 2 times more funding in any given year than prostate cancer research. When it comes to childbirth, women can choose to have children or not, while men have no say in the matter as to whether a child that they help make gets born. He says that women in general possess more control over raising children than men do. Because if they are the ones staying at home, they have more control over how that child is raised, what that child gets educated in, how the child learns to see the world, etc. And he says that trials over custody, child custody, are biased towards women, if you look at the statistics. That is, women are granted child custody much more than men are. And in fact, it's kind of just taken as a given that the woman is going to be a better parent than the guy is. So men are not awarded custody as often as women are. In one of his newer books, he talks about how men and boys are educationally disadvantaged. And we have a nice little anecdote here to support what he says. Social expectations to take on the provider and protector role compel men down certain educational and career paths. If you look at the statistics, boys are getting worse grades in school nowadays across all levels of schooling. They fail classes and have higher dropout rates. They have lower college graduation rates than girls. And they're 5 times more likely to experience juvenile detention than girls. Look around the room. Do you see any other guys except for 1 or 2 in here? He's going to say if you look at college enrollment and graduation rates, the majority of college students and graduates are women. That is actually true. He says that men receive much criticism for their actions, but little to no appreciation for the voluntary work that they engage in. On average, men spend more time working than women. They take basically all of the dangerous jobs: coal mining, construction, oil drilling, logging, jobs on which our infrastructure, our economies depend. And men make up almost the entirety of workplace deaths. I think it's over 97% of workplace deaths each year are men. Men are expected and conditioned, he says, to give their lives and operate as the personal bodyguards of women for free. This is actually something that I feel in my own life. If you have a boyfriend, ask him if he feels expected to save you from an attacker. That's an expectation that he has, something that has been built into him, right? Women are not expected to defend themselves in these situations, Farrell says. Men are expected to be their bodyguards. And so in these different ways, what he tries to show is that depending on the domain in question, men and women are privileged and disadvantaged in different ways. To call our society a patriarchy, he says, is overly simplistic. In some domains, men do have privilege. In some domains, women have privilege. And if we truly want an equal society, we need to liberate both men and women from all of these expectations and norms that have been placed on them through centuries of society, social development, and conditioning. So he says, look, we still have a long way to go. Yes, it's true that women have been oppressed. It's still true that women are disadvantaged in various ways. But what he tries to shine a light on is he thinks that men are also disadvantaged in other ways. So what we should do is we should work towards liberating both men and women from these problems, from these roles, from these expectations. He says if we truly want gender equality, that means liberating women from the expectation that they have to be a stay-at-home mom and liberating men from the expectation that they have to be the provider for the household. So, what do you think of this view? Does it rub you the wrong way?
When he mentions women having more like power in their own lives because of like power in the household, and how men can't really like talk to their boss without repercussions, whereas women are it's easier for women to talk to their husbands or the head of the household, I guess. I wonder if that's really true because it's not that long ago where women like talk to their husbands and upset them.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
not only that, if a guy gets like fired from his job, it's much easier for him to find a new job than it is for a woman to find a husband, especially if she already has like kids from that previous marriage.
Right, yeah. Children definitely impact how much power you have as women, right? If you have children, you have to take care of them. That limits your options. I didn't include this piece, but I'll include it now. What he means in terms of job security and freedom is that because men are expected to be the breadwinners, they don't have any job security. They have to keep working the job even if it sucks, because they have to provide for their wife and their children. That's what he has in mind. So yeah, it is true that in the past and still today, women can't speak up, especially if they're in a dangerous or abusive situation to their husband. But he would say when it comes to how the work gets done in men and women's lives and what men and women can put up with, he thinks that in certain ways men are more constrained because of this breadwinner expectation. Does that make sense? But I think he would agree. Women are also constrained, especially if they don't have a job and they are dependent on somebody to, pay for the food and stuff. That limits their freedom too. And if they have kids, that limits control that they have, because now they have to help provide for these things.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding some of his points, like life expectancy. Like, what are we supposed to do about that?
Well, maybe we could tell men, hey, you don't have to be the only ones working all these dangerous jobs.
I mean, I don't really think they are right now, at least, because women are still trying to get into those jobs.
Do you know many women who are bricklayers and ditch diggers?
Maybe not myself, but I'm sure there are women who are.
There probably are, yeah. I think what he's trying to get at is men feel expected to take up these jobs and nobody else is really taking them up. Like bricklaying, being a garbage man, right? Being an oil driller. These are dangerous but important jobs. And he's like, well, men have been conditioned since they were young, you do what you got to do to make money, even if that means working a job that might kill you, like logging. And he thinks that that's stupid. We should get rid of that. Yeah.
I'm not disputing some of these facts, but men made our constitution. Men kind of start I don't know, they made the system. So if you want to complain about it, you freaking started it. Women had absolutely no fucking say in any of this. So you don't like it, you can change it. Because we don't get a voice to decide any of that. So I don't know.
Well, I think here's what he would say. Yes, you're right. Men historically have formally made the rules. But think about what percentage of men have that power or control. Does the average guy have any control over what he gets socialized into being, the kind of perceptions that he comes to have of himself or what's expected of him. Like your average guy, walking down the street, he doesn't have any control to change the rules, Just as we say, women don't have control by themselves to change how society sees them, right? Or how they are conditioned to think and act. So I think he would agree with you that men have made the rules, but that was an extremely small minority of men. And the vast majority of men today now are stuck with this shit too, and it sucks.
I think that that's a fair point, but I also think that a lot of these problems are more perpetuated by men to other men.
Okay.
As opposed to like the women's problems where it's more by men onto women. This is expectations that men have for other men, and so that's what kind of keeps those problems.
Okay. So one of the reasons why, let's say maybe what's holding men's liberation back is other men.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like if I had a husband or something and he was like, I want to be a stay-at-home dad, I'm like, okay, like that's fine. I'm not stopping him, but then other men more often are going to be like, that's not your role, that's not where you fit, like stuff like that. Just for like a small example.
That's fair. Yeah. Would we say the same thing about women though? Do you think a lot of the expectations and norms that are placed on women are driven by men or other women?
Men.
You think so?
Yeah.
Can you give me some examples?
Like with the unwanted attention and stuff, that's us receiving it from men.
Sure, yeah. Yeah.
A lot of this like marketing and like feminine products, it's not being done by women, it's being done by men. Like who's like doing like the pink marketing and everything. Other women aren't expecting me to stay at home and raise my kid. My husband who gave me the kid is. Like, I think a lot of it's based on men.
Okay, so the idea I'm getting is because men are in these positions of power and authority, women are socialized to think and behave in certain ways, and they're not responsible for that. Whereas because men are in positions of power and authority and they're conditioned to do this stuff, they are responsible for that. But again, like, we want to be careful not to like inflate the category of men, because the vast majority of men, I would say, don't have the kind of power that like the patriarchy does, right? So do you just fundamentally kind of disagree with the idea that society was constructed by both men's and women's decisions and actions? Because if women are making 85% of the consumer decisions, who's driving like how products are made and what products get consumed in the US, for example? Like, you could buy men's razors, right? And you'd save money. Or no? Maybe that's not desirable, though. I mean, the women's razors probably feel better on your skin, right?
They're way cheaper.
They also, they're better quality.
Yeah, they shave better.
The men's razors shave better?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing I'm using them.
Good thing.
So, it seems like y'all are disagreeing on who we should say is morally responsible for the state of affairs, and who is responsible for fixing things, right? The sense I'm getting is that you're saying men are morally responsible for all this, and men are responsible for changing it. Does that capture your view, or no? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just trying to... Let's try thinking about it like this. Historically, women have always been stay-at-home moms, right? and men worked. And we can recognize this has constrained women. This has made it so they have not been able to achieve financial security for themselves, right? It's limited their life. If it's true that men's actions and decisions are propping all of this up, aren't women also in part responsible because women raised those men? Or no?
Okay, so I work in a preschool, so I feel like we do a really good job, like, socializing little boys to be empathetic and kind. And
Good.
But then once you get to elementary school and there's other, like, maybe not everyone is, like, raised. Like, I feel like it really needs to start with, like, babies.
Sure, yeah.
You can only do so much with, like, 5 really sweet, nice, like the patriarchy boys, and then you get to school and they're like, no, you need to treat women like shit, and then they're like, oh yeah, I do, and then they start acting like that.
Okay.
So I feel like it needs to be more universal, like, approach.
Yeah. I think I would agree with that. I think Farrell would agree with that too. He thinks all of these expectations and norms are holding men and women back. He doesn't think women should be expected to be stay-at-home moms or to look pretty all the time. He thinks harassment is terrible. Likewise, he thinks, look, we shouldn't condition men to think that they have to be the ones fighting in wars. We shouldn't condition men to think they have to be the breadwinners, that they have to sacrifice, or what they see as a sacrifice, right? Maybe, you're like, it's not much of a sacrifice compared to what women have gone through. So do you agree with his general idea that we should liberate the sexes from all of these norms and roles that are imposed on them? Okay, so it doesn't look like we have a different aim at the end of the day, right? Yeah.
I do think that these are like a lot of problems, but I do feel like I disagree with him, like saying that makes society both patriarchal and matriarchal, because a lot of like these problems come from like patriarchal ideas, like, well, men are supposed to be the breadwinners because they're smarter and stronger, so that's why they're expected to do that, and they're not favored in custody cases because raising children is the woman's job. And I think that, like, even though like men at the bottom aren't really like always seeing like the kind of privileges, like still at the top it's mostly men, and that's why we're in a patriarchal society. And I think that like the patriarchy also affects men negatively in like these specific ways, and I don't think it's necessarily helpful to be like, well, we should blame women and men, even if like everybody can kind of uphold the patriarchy. And
that's fair.
We can all like try and learn how to get rid of like these roles that are negatively impacting everyone.
Yeah, I think what he says he's trying to do in this book is achieve balance. He says he's not interested in providing a balanced view. He says he's trying to achieve balance because he thinks that feminism has sold a story to people that men are solely responsible for all the bad things. And he's like, that's just not true. Like, everybody's upholding this stuff in different ways. So I think, like, he would agree with your sentiment, And I lost my train of thought. There it goes. Okay. Does anybody have any final questions, comments, concerns?
Do you think Lawrence saw the Barbie movie?
I bet he did. Yeah. If you look up videos of him, he is a very soft-spoken, gentle guy. Like, he's not this macho alpha male Chad, okay? He's like, if you he's not somebody that you would see supporting this red pill stuff. Yeah.
I feel like expectations, there are different ways in both men hold those expectations for other men and women to women. Because in the female sphere, there are women who like judge other women for like either their career choice or how they decide to like parent if they are parents.
Sure, yeah. Or how they look.
And for like men, I feel like a lot of the issues, at least in modern day, is like based on like this idea of how to be a man and going back to like that alpha macho way.
Yeah.
And just men like criticizing other men who don't fit that mold, like very harshly, I say.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think in different ways, Farrell would echo this idea that men and women are both upholding the expectations and roles that constrain men and women in different ways. So I think he would say, yeah, like you want to, live a good life as a man. Who do you look to do that? Your dad. What did your dad teach you to do? Never talk about your feelings. Never cry. Work yourself until you are filled up with resentment, right? That's like the model that was given to boys, and that continues to be given to boys. And the same thing for girls. Girls are expected to be quiet and be nice and be pretty and only speak, during certain times. And men have definitely inculcated that in women, and I think he would say mothers have done that too. So he doesn't give us like, oh, men do this 60% of the time and women do this 40%. He doesn't say that. He doesn't give us statistics like that. What he's trying to get people to see is that if we're going to change things, that involves men and women changing how they speak and act. And that this equality cannot be established just by men doing things or just by women doing things. So maybe that's a good place to end. What do you think? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming. That's all I have for you. Talk about this stuff with your friends and family members. Ask your mom how her life has been constrained. Ask your dad how he feels like his life has been constrained about the role he's supposed to live up to. Okay. Thank you, folks. I'll see you all on Monday.